How much influence does Israel have on British politics? International Aid Minister Priti Patel resigned after social media revealed secret meetings with Israeli officials during a so-called family holiday. Israeli officials posted pictures with Ms. Patel, indicating high-level contact with the Israeli administration. The secrecy violated government rules requiring careful documentation of official meetings to prevent conflicts of interest and illicit lobbying by foreign powers. Government protocol was also broken when Ms. Patel travelled with the Israeli army to the Golan Heights, which is occupied Syrian territory. There she was inspecting an Israeli military field hospital which treats Syrians, including Al-Qaeda affiliated fighters wounded in Syria's civil war. Ms. Patel met at least 12 Israeli officials, including the Israeli Prime Minister, despite her claims that this was merely a holiday and not an official visit. Usually, the Israeli lobby has been effective at staying in the shadows, with those seeking to highlight this influence finding it hard to be heard. This time, social media managed to break through this silence. Nevertheless, Israel's lobbying seems to be delivering results. Ms. Patel called for the Israeli army, one of the most powerful in the world, to receive British overseas aid. She also called for aid cuts to Palestine, including for major projects in Gaza. Yet critics in politics and amongst the public seem cautious because those who criticise the lobby may risk being accused of anti-Semitism. Senior Conservative Alan Duncan may even have lost his job thanks partly to Israel's opposition to his support for the Palestinian cause. Why are countries like Russia investigated for allegedly interfering with American politics, while Israel does so without criticism? And how much influence should one country have on another's government? Simple questions with important answers. Priti Patel was forced to resign after news emerged of her secret meetings with senior Israeli officials, including leader Benjamin Netanyahu. What do you think was the true purpose of her meetings? We put that to the public here in London. Here's what they told us.
No, I think that the purpose of the meeting was to discuss policies and influencing policies through the cabinet, through the British government in favor of Israel. I mean, what else? Whether they are best friends and they want to grab lunch, they're still representatives of state. So, yeah, I think
if she's doing it, there's clearly a purpose behind it, and I think possibly for her own sake, but also I think maybe she's trying to push an agenda that might be unpopular in the UK to deepen relations with Israel to such an extent that it blindsides the view that Palestinians aren't important anymore.
Sometimes you need to have these meetings to get to know people, but if it's an official engagement on subjects that are difficult, then surely it's got to be done through appropriate channels. So I think it's a time and place, isn't it? And obviously there's things that go on in politics behind the scenes that we never get to hear about, as you will well know. But if it's official business and it's a very difficult subject, then it needs to be done properly. So it's horses for courses would be my view.
I'd like to think she was just trying to get things done. Secret meetings, I'm sure there's a lot of secret meetings going on all of the time.
Do you think it was wrong?
I don't necessarily think having a secret meeting was wrong, although at some stage I suppose the right people have got to find out that these things are going on, yeah.
If it's without the knowledge of other members of the cabinet, it's hard to speculate, but that makes it inherently problematic. If we don't know what they're saying, and their cabinet ministers don't know, and the Prime Minister doesn't know, then it could be any number of things, and it could be for purely personal gain, which I think is what was so worrying.
Well, it's a really bizarre episode, and who knows what goes on in the minds of these people, or indeed in their private communications. Numbers of ideas have been suggested. One is that she was in charge of a budget for international aid and development and was being pressured to reduce the payments to the Palestinians and had in fact done so. Another one is that she organised a meeting with Gilad Erdan, the security minister, and that this may be associated with the anti-Semitism campaigns which Erdogan has been promoting around the world as a way of protecting Israel, or even that she is was looking for Israeli friends and friends of Israel who might support her in a bid for the leadership at some future time. Who knows? I mean, it could be something else entirely, but there are enough reasons why she might have done it, but it does appear to have been rather counterproductive.
Well, we know the Israeli lobby has a huge influence, not just here in the UK, but also in the US and Europe as well. And this to me is another example of how they try and influence British foreign policy. Priti Patel was invited unofficially, as we are told, to really discuss British foreign policy on a freelance basis. And she was willing to change long-standing British foreign policy in supporting the Palestinians and transferring aid from the Palestinians to the Israeli army, which is completely against British foreign policy. But for me, it was more the cavalier way in which she approached this. It was as though she was doing nothing wrong. So this, again, to me shows the manner in which they try and influence, in a nefarious way, British foreign policy.
A 6-month undercover investigation revealed how much Israel and its lobby penetrates different levels of British parliamentary politics. Are citizens comfortable with a foreign power having such influence on British democracy? We asked them.
I'm sure it's common in every country, right? I mean, you know, US and UK have been influencing foreign policy in every other country ever, I'm sure. So I can't imagine it's any different to that.
No, I think countries should have an influence, and the ones with the most expertise and power should have more influence to do good, you know what I mean? So like, I think this is not being elitist, but there can be, you know, a good thing about it, like an advantageous, beneficial, but this is so one-sided and so unilateral, you know, like bilateral type of agreements that influence people who are not part of the conversation, you know, like, so obviously, like, in that case, no, but yeah, where it's more democratic, like, the whole problem with this is that it's not transparent, it's illegitimate.
No, I'm not comfortable with it. I mean, I think the allegations have been exaggerated to some extent, but I think it's certainly something that the government should always be worried about.
I think it's a question of negotiation, isn't it? And whether you value their opinion or not. You look at what's happening in the news today. Trump's opinion aren't worth a piece of paper or tweet that they're written in. Some people you would listen to, some people you wouldn't. So it's a question of judgment and what you think of that particular country and whether you value their opinion or not.
Actually, I think that each country needs to be aware of other countries are doing. We could probably see, for example, about America's and how all the things that they have been doing through the years. I think that people should be aware of this kind of stuff because it's on the interest of everybody.
I mean, you'd like to think this is a country one that's always had an awful lot of influence around the world and has got open to influence from others as well, I suppose. We're still going to have our own views as far as life is concerned. Yeah, at a certain point, influencing our own democracy is a point that you've got to draw a line, I suppose.
No, because there might be some good applications for it, but in general, we don't get to vote, obviously, in their elections or anything like that, and B, if we don't know about it, that makes it twice as bad, and particularly when you consider that the potential influence of Russia in the 2016 elections, that makes it even worse, I think.
I'm not perhaps your average British citizen. I'm actually a Jewish British citizen. I have particular reasons for being concerned because it's quite clear that the Israeli embassy was closely associated with the setting up of all kinds of basically fake groups. They're called AstroTurf. They have no real roots, but they are secretly fertilized by money and help from the embassy and other similar groups. Of course it worries me. It worries me particularly because they have been promoting this campaign of alleging that there's anti-Semitism on the left, where in fact what they're gunning for is Jeremy Corbyn, who is a left-supported leader of the Labour Party, who actually is a long-standing friend of the Palestinians. So they've been trying to unseat him. And what that programme demonstrates is how far they were willing to go to do that.
I think every citizen is to be conscious of the fact that their democracy is being undermined. Is something that we should be all concerned about. Democracy around the world is in a very unhealthy position at the moment with Trump in America and here in the UK. So while big businesses have a massive impact, but the fact that a foreign country can influence our foreign policy and divert the course of our foreign policy away from justice and human rights is something we should all be concerned about.
Britain is in the process of leaving the European Union, partly because politicians argued it should be free and independent from Brussels. Does the British public think it's only the EU that has too much influence on British politics?
These huge multinational corporations have influence in politics everywhere, so the EU is just another, state that's influenced by it. I wouldn't say it's any different. Yeah.
I mean, the EU pushes legislation, but most legislation that the EU pushes for is actually very progressive, and labor laws, many gender, quotas and good labor laws or social security laws are enforced by the EU. And in fact, the EU Commission for Human Rights is the most democratic and influencing government body that works on human rights. So I think the EU pushing for legislation is not so bad, but the UK has always had one foot in and one foot out, so it hasn't been pushed as much as, for example, Portugal, because I'm from Portugal, and we have even less of a say, as a country.
No, but I'm very keen on keeping our politics and our politicians as close as we possibly can.
I think we've perhaps been too greatly influenced by America over the years. I don't have a great problem with some of the influence the EU has exerted over it. I think much of it has been to our great benefit over the last 40, 50 years. So again, it's a question of balance, but I think, yes, I think probably America has had a significant influence on us, not necessarily always to the good.
Yeah, of course, because when we have a lot of money involved, power comes from here. For example, banks, from pharmaceutical companies, they have the control because it's their market, so everyone wants to protect his own interest, and that's it. At the end, it's always the ethical part against the profit, yeah.
Obviously been tracking the news lately, and I've noticed a sort of sea shift in the opinions that seem to be coming across about the Russians, that it's, might be doing this to, it's a matter of fact. At that point, if they're trying to unduly influence our way of life, that's not going to be shouldn't be tolerated.
The EU is an entirely different magnitude of effect. Because we've been living for how many years it is, 40 years, with a whole raft of EU legislation, it permeates all aspects of British life, not just by political influence, but by the laws that we live by. Israel has nothing like that penetration. It worries me that Israel's friends are as influential as they are, because Palestine doesn't have so many influential friends, and leads to an imbalance in the discussion in the media and in politics in this country, which is unhealthy. But it's not like the influence of the European Union anywhere at all.
I think this question muddies the water a bit. I mean, the EU's relation with Britain is framed under treaties and law. So there's no question of EU exerting undue influence on Britain, whereas in the case of Israel, there are armies of lobbyists who are working behind the scene in influencing British foreign policy, and to the detriment of the UK. I mean, the war in 2003 against Iraq, for example, was seen as being really one of the goals, one of the successes of the Israeli lobby. So you have foreign misadventures, or you can go back to 1956, in a failure in the war in the Suez. So there are many examples we can show and say that, the Israeli foreign policy or Israeli lobbies are undermining British foreign policy, British democracy, in a way which Brussels can never ever achieve, because they don't have a lobby of armies of lobbyists who are calling on the Britain to support occupation, to undermine international law, to support a regime which in West Bank and Gaza at least is an apartheid state.
How influential has Israel become? It is estimated that about 80% of Conservative MPs belong to the group known as the Conservative Friends of Israel. Over 90% of government ministers are said to also be members. Despite its major influence over Britain and America, Israel's total population equals around 7.8 million citizens, meaning that this country, with its enormous political lobbying influence, has almost exactly the same population as London.
The British Labour Party has experienced an anti-Semitism scandal since Jeremy Corbyn became the party's leader. Does the public think there really is an anti-Semitism problem in the Labour Party, and why?
You make one comment and you're instantly accused of being anti-Semitic, so, you know, it's a bit dangerous.
A lot of media games and, a few unfortunate expressions of opinion. Anti-Semitic, no, I don't know.
I don't think so, no. I don't think they are. Maybe there is some, I would say some positions they have on the Middle East that might not be compatible with some, I would say, Jewish interests or Israeli interests, but I wouldn't call it anti-Semitic.
So I personally think that Jeremy Corbyn isn't anti-Semitic, or at least doesn't show it to any extent, but I think sometimes the people he surrounds himself with, and there are some fringes of the Labour Party that are quite anti-Semitic, like as in at the Labour Party conference, you had the Jewish Labour Forum and the Labour Friends of Israel being called to be expelled, and so that's where I think we see certain elements of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, and that is dangerous and something that I think shouldn't be glossed over like Shami Chakrabarti did, but something that should be properly addressed.
I'll be honest, maybe I've not been keeping up with events that much, but I've never really seen any real proof of that. I'm conscious that within the media sometimes it just seems to be a self-fulfilling thing at the end. I've not seen any really any evidence of it.
It's something that can be used to smear legitimate pro-Palestinian politics, but I'm not comfortable commenting without looking at the facts.
Have you seen evidence, or has evidence come to light that you have thought definitely does point to it, or are you not persuaded?
No, I haven't seen evidence that definitely does, but I haven't gone out and looked for it either. So it's a limited perspective.
Well, I've been in the Labour Party on and off since 1962, and until very recently, I had not had a single incident of anyone saying anything that was in any way remotely anti-Semitic. And as I'm Jewish, you'd have thought that I might have noticed it if it had happened. Since in the last few weeks I did hear one example of somebody who was a real conspiracy freak, who really believed every conspiracy he heard, and so he is susceptible to seeing Israeli conspiracies as well as others. But it wasn't particularly anti-Semitic, it was just the man is, pardon the expression, a bit of a nutter. And this is true of nearly all of my Jewish friends. There is a whole organisation of us, Jewish Voice for Labour, who basically do not believe the anti-Semitism scares that are being put around, because we know we haven't experienced it ourselves. And if there had been anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, we'd be the first to know.
I don't think the Labour Party is any less anti-Semitic than some of the other parties like the Conservatives or the Lib Dems. You know, they are part and parcel of society. Most parties, to some degree, they have some levels of discrimination and racism within them. So, but the case with Labour is partly because Jeremy Corbyn is seen as a critic of Israel, and critics of Israel are routinely undermined and delegitimized by accusations of anti-Semitism. So this slur has been thrown towards him to undermine his critical position towards the Israeli state and Israeli occupation. This is something that's been happening as strategy for a long time, and we know it's quite a familiar strategy. And I don't think the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, definitely is not an anti-Semite.
Russia has been persistently accused of interfering in American politics. Considering that Israel regularly interferes in American politics and has now been shown to interfere in British politics too, why is there not the same amount of outrage towards Israel? Here's the public's opinion.
Yeah, it's kind of freaky, you know, but it's totally possible. And who says that countries are, you know, the US isn't doing that with other, or like, who knows, right? Because it's so easy now with the internet, hacking, this type of monitoring, you know, like you can so easily monitor people's people's wants, and you know how Google knows. You see what I'm saying, right? Monitoring, surveillance through like people's clicks and stuff.
I think where there's undue influence going on, I think it's fair that everyone gets the microscope put on them.
Because it's Russia, I guess. Yeah, I think they all do it. Europe does it, Britain does it, America does it. So I'm not surprised by that.
I think the Israel question, why they're not so much criticised, I think sometimes some people are quite conscious about intervening because it might look like an anti-Israel or an anti-Semitic attack, when they should be able to make the distinction between an anti-Israel comment and a anti-Semitic comment.
That's a good point. I think that Putin is doing a great job because Russia is an emerging country. Because Israel is, I think, it's always been protected by the United States. So that's it. Because it's always been United States against Russia. So it's, I don't want to say it, but it's in the interest of everybody to make Russia don't look that great. Yeah.
I think there might be a very strong pro-Israeli lobby in America and possibly in this country. I also think that Russia right now is more of a strategic adversary to us, or sometimes adversary, than Israel is. Israel keeps out of our affairs when it directly contradicts us.
Well, Israel is certainly a powerful influence in the United States. The Israel lobby there vies with the gun lobby to be the most influential in Congress. We didn't realize, we knew there must be some Israeli influence in Britain, but we only recently realized how well organized it is. The question was, why Russia? Well, there's a long-standing antagonism between Russia and the United States. Hasn't gone away. Putin certainly feels that he's challenged by the United States in various ways. Israel is an entirely different kettle of fish. Israel is supposed to be a friend of the United States rather than an enemy, so that's possibly why there's not so much fuss made about what they do. And they have many more influential friends in high places in the United States than the Russians do. So I guess that's the difference.
I mean, the simple answer is that Israel is seen as an ally and Russia isn't. But some would say, you know, why, if you have Israel as a friend, who needs an enemy? I mean, if you look at the foreign policies which Britain took part in over the last decade, I mean, 2003 invasion of Iraq, for one, it's the most disastrous foreign policy ever, and it's one of the reasons Britain went to war is the lobbying of Netanyahu and Israeli hawks. There are other examples that, for example, Britain is shamed by its support for the Israelis, Israeli occupation, Israeli settlements, violations of international law, which Britain is asked to remain silent about. So these are all things which shames the UK, but for some reason we don't hear as much, and there's a distraction with the focus on Russia. I think the focus should be on a friendly ally, so-called friendly ally like Israel, who is undermining British foreign policy, who is undermining international law, and calling on the British government and working actively to silence behind-the-scene British MPs as well.
There is growing hysteria about foreign and particularly Russian interference in US and European politics. Yet Western states seem happy with the potentially self-serving influence of Israel's lobbyists. Even systematic abuses by the Israeli army, highlighted on social media, and Benjamin Netanyahu's active efforts to oppose the nuclear accord with Iran do not attract sustained mainstream media attention.
It's been suggested Israel has too much influence on British politics. Yet, compared to the criticisms directed at Russia for its alleged influence over other countries, Israel's lobbying is rarely mentioned. And that leads to this simple but uncomfortable question. Is the mainstream Western media uninterested in or unwilling to report Israel's influence in America and the UK? Perhaps the intervention of powerful friends and the fear of being accused of anti-Semitism combine to create a conspiracy of silence.